Welcome to the channel. In today's video, we will read a story about a man who had a neighbor that trying to steal his family house but got Carmen and a $200,000 bill slapped in her face instead. This is a two-part story, so be sure to like and subscribe for part 2. Let's get right into it. Before we get started, let's introduce the main characters. Entitled neighbor will be called Ann going forward, and the spoiled son of the entitled neighbor will be referred to as entitled son. There will also be the previous owner of our house, who will be called P.O., though they have a limited part in this story. Also, keep in mind while reading this story that from the time we bought the house to current day was almost 15 years. So unless otherwise stated, you can assume that there was a pretty big gap between most events that took place. Let's get started. In order to properly build up to the climax and set the stage for the events that took place, first I have to give a little background. Most of this happened before we bought and moved into this house. Anne owned a very large chunk of property which was down the road from a popular recreational lake in our area. I say down the road, but it's actually a pretty fair distance away. Even though the road that Anne lives on is the only road leading to multiple lakefront properties and resorts, along with the most popular boat dock on this side of the lake, the properties here aren't extremely valuable that normal people can't afford them. But there are some extremely valuable properties down the road with very rich people driving by all the time. This will be relevant later in the story. Karen, being quite wealthy and owning a very large chunk of property, ended up splitting her property off into 4 roughly equal sections when her children came of age. One she gave to her daughter, who somehow is a pretty decent person considering the rest of her family. Then another section she gave to her son, and she built houses for them on both of the properties roughly to her children's specifications. Then on the 4th bit of property, the one that did not have her own house on it, she built a small convenience store. This will also be relevant later on. Now, I'm not sure why, probably to avoid possible future disputes or something, she actually ended up giving the deeds to her children for their respective houses and properties. You can probably tell where this is going. Well, while respectable daughter was pretty respectable, the irresponsible son was a party maniac. Everyone in the neighborhood at the time absolutely hated him. He would throw loud, obnoxious, late-night parties almost every single night and keep people awake. The police apparently had someone stationed nearby because they were called on him so often. It probably didn't help his entitlement that Mommy paid all of the bills for him. She kept everything in her name: water, electric, garbage, everything. They all went to her mailbox. Well, all except for one, that is. Since the property was in his name, so was the property tax, which he never gave to Anne and instead just ignored. I guess Anne either just didn't think about it or assumed that he was paying it himself. Either way, it didn't come as a surprise when the police showed up at his house, but it did when he did not come back and the house went up for auction. At this point, the house was in shambles. Holes in the drywall, and even the living room floor had a huge hole leading down into the garage basement. The kitchen floor and subfloor needed to be totally replaced. Almost all of the walls were covered in mud. Basically, his irresponsibility and party habits left the house in what the banks considered an unlivable condition. Because of that, the only people who could afford it were those who could pay out of pocket for it. Enter P.O. P.O. was a house flipper. Not one of the big wealthy ones that you see on TV, but more of a hobbyist than anything. He was retired, and he flipped houses to keep him busy and active. P.O. would buy a house like this one super cheap on auction, fix it up himself, then put it back on the market. While he fixed it up, he would live off of the profit from the previous house, and typically about the time he finished fixing one up and buying the next one, his profit would have about run out. Any that he had left over just went into an emergency savings fund, which he said wasn't anything special anyways. We were in the market for a new place but couldn't afford anything super expensive on our budget. But when we saw this place on a website for sale, it seemed perfect. It was the perfect size and in the perfect neighborhood, and even down the road from the lake, which we love fishing in and boating, so it was perfect in almost every way, or at least it looked that way. We were scared of the price, which wasn't listed on the website yet, but it wouldn't hurt to at least have a look and see. We drove by to look at it and found P.O. working on it. We stopped in to say hi and asked the price. He explained that he was planning to fix it up and sell it, and that his realtor just added it to the website's database to make it easier and more efficient when he was ready to actually sell it. Anyways, we sat down and had a nice chat with him, just being friendly and all, and he appreciated the company. We explained that we would be willing to buy it from him for a reasonable price considering its current condition and the work he had already put into it. He had it about half finished. We explained that we would love to finish it and live in it as a forever home. He turned us down, explaining that he already had several offers for it and didn't feel right selling it to us, and that we could buy it for the full price when he was finished. So we kindly thanked him and left our number, asking him to call us if he ever changed his mind, which he promised he would. Less than 2 weeks later, we actually got an unexpected call from him. He explained that his sister had come down sick in another state and that he wanted to go and be with her and would not have enough time or patience to finish the house. He explained that the house was not up to code, but if we could find a way to buy it, then he'd be happy to sell it to us for a reasonable price. We happily agreed and ran our looking for banks. We had a few connections from a realtor friend of ours who actually helped us find a bank willing to loan the money to buy the house with a few conditions attached. Basically, we would have 2 weeks to bring the house up to code. Otherwise, they could default on the loan and auction it off. After explaining the situation to P.O., he offered to help as much as he could. He couldn't actually do any work to the house because he was in such a rush, but he explained exactly what we needed to do to bring it up to code and meet the bare minimum requirements, how much time and effort it would take, and how much money it would cost. He even offered to help us out another way. We took out a loan for twice what he actually wanted for the house, and he gave us back the other half. We used that money for repairs to the house. After the work he had already put in, the house was so close to meeting code that we could probably have done it ourselves, but just in case, we called in a few friends and got it knocked out in half the time. After getting it up to code, however, there was still plenty of work that needed to be done, and so we spent several months replacing flooring and subflooring, rewiring, patching holes in the walls, replacing old, ugly, literally decomposing wallpaper that was stuck directly to the drywall. You get the point. We put a ton of work into the place. Then it was finally time to move into our dream home. It still had a few issues that we would fix down the road as we went on, but it was finally time to move in. We weren't even finished moving in yet when Anne came over to introduce herself. As we were working things out with P.O. in the very limited time that we had, he had warned us over and over about Anne and her entitled attitude. At first, Anne was extremely nice, and we had no idea why P.O. warned us about her so much. Then it happened. As we were wrapping up our conversation, she explained to us in a very kind and compassionate way that our house actually belonged to her and that we had 30 days to get out. She said that she felt sorry for us since we were scammed so bad, but that it was actually her house and that P.O. had no right to sell it to us at all. We'd heard horror stories about people being scammed like that before, so you could imagine our terror when she explained all of this to us. We were horrified that we had put in all of this time and effort and money into this dream house, and now we were going to lose it just like that because we fell for some guy's scam. We thanked her for explaining it to us and being so nice, and said that we would talk to the bank and P.O. and get it all figured out. So that's what we did. We talked to the bank, who confirmed that P.O. was the actual owner of the deed. We spoke to the realtor, who also testified to the same thing. We spoke to P.O., who explained that they accused him of stealing the house multiple times after he bought it on auction, and that he was harassed by her constantly over the house. Everyone that we spoke to had the exact same story. We even went up to the courthouse and confirmed that our name was on the deed. During this process is when we heard the backstory about the son from several neighbors. Anne came by not long after this and asked us when she could expect us to be moved out, which we explained would never happen as we legally owned the property and it wasn't our fault that her son lost the property. We apologized for the loss that she had and explained that we knew it was probably really hard to lose her family property like that because of her son's negligence. But that was not our fault, and we weren't just going to give her a property that we bought with our own hard-earned money and worked so hard to fix up. Then, realizing that we knew the situation, she decided to go into a long sob story about how this property had been in her family for generations and that she couldn't bear to lose it, and how P.O. had stolen it from them when they were caught up in the confusion of their child being arrested. We asked why they didn't bid for the house and buy it back after he lost it, considering that we bought it from P.O. for only about $50K. And considering that he was still making a small profit on that even after all of the work and materials he'd put into it before selling it to us. They could have easily bought it for next to nothing at auction and had it back and explained that she felt the house and property were being stolen from them and that they refused to pay for something that rightfully belonged to them. We apologized once more but explained that there was no way we were going to take a loss on the property, especially after all of the time and effort that we put into it and the additional materials that we bought for it just to make her happy. However, we were sympathetic with her situation and offered to sell the house to her for a very reasonable price. 100K, which, considering its location and how fixed up it is, that was still just over half of its total market value. After buying it from PO for 50K and putting an additional 30K into materials plus several months of hard labor to fix it up, we felt that was a very reasonable price. We didn't say anything, but we would even be willing to go down to 90K if she wanted to negotiate with us. She immediately counter-offered with 40K, explaining that she shouldn't have to pay anything at all for something that rightfully belongs to her. When we said that was way too low, she responded saying that she understood how much effort we put into it and that we had to buy a lot of materials to fix it up, so she would be nice and throw in an extra 10K for all the stuff we did to the house. When we told her that 50K was what we bought the house for from PO, she got upset and called us liars and thieves, saying the house was a complete dump and that there was no way it was worth that much. Not only had she resorted to name-calling at this point, but going as far as to call our dream home a dump after all the blood, sweat, and tears, not to mention dollars, that we poured into it. We were done with her BS and kindly asked her to get out of our house, explaining that she was no longer welcome here and that we would never sell our house to her even if she offered us double the marked value. She obviously got upset about this and threw all kinds of insults at us as she walked out the door. Later, we found out that she was spreading all kinds of rumors about us throughout the neighborhood, saying that we stole the house from her and all kinds of other stupid stuff. At first, we ignored it, thinking that no one would actually believe it. Then a guy pulled into our driveway with a gun, threatening us to get out. Now, we'd never met him before, but we had heard of him. He apparently considered himself to be the peacekeeper of the neighborhood and confronted anyone who caused problems like this. Most of the people in our neighborhood actually liked him, saying he was a pretty reasonable guy, and being a very rural neighborhood where plenty of not-so-law-abiding citizens live, most people greatly appreciated his presence. He actually did work hard to keep the neighborhood as peaceful as possible and did way more than the cops actually do most of the time. Anyways, just a note, our neighborhood is split into two primary sections. One section is filled with mostly old retired people. It's very nice and peaceful, and everyone gets along. The other is filled with the less law-abiding people further into the wilderness and away from prying eyes. We live at the edge of the peaceful part, separated by about a mile or so of woodland and farmland. So hearing about him before and assuming based on descriptions that this was the same guy, we decided to test out that hypothesis. We told him that we had no idea what was going on and invited him in for a beer and chat. We allowed him to bring his gun but told him that we would be bringing our own as well. Almost everyone in my town has a gun. There are more gun stores than there are dollar stores, if that says anything. So we weren't really worried about him having a gun with him. That doesn't really mean much in our town. It's just a way of saying, hey, I'm capable of defending myself if this gets out of hand. Now, if someone pointed it at you, which he didn't, then that would be a different story. Back to the main story. He agreed, and after a few hours of chatting and explaining the situation, he explained that he figured it was something like that and apologized for the misunderstanding. He explained that he got caught up in the rumors and flipped a switch and that it wouldn't happen again. He also thanked us for buying it, explaining that when the son moved out, everyone was much happier. He didn't have to hear people complaining about loud music and drunk, high teenagers stumbling down the middle of the road in the middle of the night and nearly getting run over. We all had a good laugh about it afterward, and he left without saying another word. That's the end of part 1 of this story. What do you guys think about the situation so far? What would you do if you were in his shoes? Let me know in the comments, and I will see you in the next video.